Hello, everyone. This is Professor Hamamoto. It is February 23rd, year 2022, 3 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. And today's talk is titled Electronic Altar of Human Sacrifice. Don't be alarmed. Don't be put off by it. I've been reading a lot of spooky, scary, horror type literature, short stories, novels, as well as films and biographies, including one on the great British actor Christopher Lee. So maybe I'm in that mode. However, I will tell you that before I conclude this talk today, I'm going to be putting forth some solutions, some possible solutions on how to worm our way out of our predicament here. If there's a problem, there's a solution. It's a dialectical process right here. We're dealing with human created problems. Well, we can come up with human created solutions. So, with that, I welcome Melissa Kleiverda. I welcome Michael Charlie. I welcome Marshall Ezel, who just clicked in here. One of the advantages of being consigned to this alternate channel is that I get to say hello to you before I start here. And speaking of alternate channels, while it's on my mind, I will say that if you want to see myself and my friend and colleague, John O'Loughlin, this evening, if you're in Eastern time, it's 5 o'clock my time, Pacific Standard Time, you're going to have to kind of search a little bit because it's not on Macduff Lives 2. I think it might be under Macduff Lives 3 because my friend and colleague, John O'Loughlin, like myself, he's been put in the jailhouse by TubeU. I don't know, a week or two. I don't know. I think I'm out, but I'm just staying on this channel to be consistent for the remainder of this week. Doesn't really matter because, as I told you before, I get the hardcore audience right here, the people who are not just kind of passing through because they saw something that caught their interest. So that's fine. And equally as important, this is my first draft. This is my run through. This is when I vocalize a lot of the published work that I hope to accomplish before this is all over. So don't feel sorry for me. Don't be alarmed. I'm still around because some people are on the other channel are wondering what happened to me. I'm still here, and hopefully you've been able to find me. So this evening, I'm going to take an hour off, have a cup of tea, and then join my friend and colleague John O'Loughlin. But I think it's Macduff 3. I have a different link that I have to click into. So it's going to be worth your while because I'll have some fresh insights to share with them this evening. And this is really my favorite show, not my show. I mean, I enjoy being with you here, but I get to interact with another human being. Well, you're human beings. I'm interacting with you in a way, but we're we're having a conversation, let's say. So that's this afternoon, this evening. I was wanting to review this book by a incredible author. You probably know who she is. Her name is Elena Freeland, and I read her book. I think she's done about 3 books by now, but I started reading her a number of years ago, and I think it was 2, maybe 3 years ago now. Yeah, more like 3 years ago. I was fortunate enough to catch her at a talk locally in my area. She's across the river here in West Sacramento. I'm in Sacramento, the state capital of California, or as we call it, Hollywood for ugly people. And she gave an incredible talk, and it was preceded by a gentleman by the name of Christopher Fontenot, who's also incredible. I don't think he's written anything, but if he does, I'll stamp up the book right away. But Elena Freeland has a fairly new book. I think it came out at the end of this past year, 2021. It might have the copyright date 2021, 22. I just acquired it 2 or 3 months ago, and I'm still reading it. Looks excellent. It's thick as a doorstop, as this book is that I'm going to be talking about today is is also very well documented, very well researched. But I'm not going to stick on this one book alone. It's called The Invisible Rainbow, and it's written by a prominent figure in this movement. And it is a movement. It's becoming a less of a boutique movement to larger mainstream movement, helped along, by the way, because of the larger awakening of the American and the world public to issues of health sovereignty and issues of corporatism. He doesn't get too much into the politics, Arthur Firstenberg, of it in this particular book. However, he is a prominent activist. He's not just a theoretician, a historian, but he is very much active in his local community to help ensure the health of his fellow human beings, our furry friends, our animal friends, and plants. Plants are alive. Plants are sentient, right? Contrary to what we've been taught, and most of you know this, but I learned this from Firstenberg, who communicated some research by some pioneering scientists. This is all based on hard science, by the way. You'll realize that or understand it or appreciate it as I go through it. But according to the people he researched, plants have a nervous system. It's not like ours exactly. It's not like a dog or a cat or a bird's nervous system, but it is a nervous system. And they communicates with not just that particular plant, but with other plants and perhaps with other plant life, tree life, maybe other creatures in the forest. And this is not all woo-woo metaphysical stuff, although I do believe there's a metaphysical substrate behind it. And he doesn't get into that very much either. That's another book entirely. I don't know what his personal beliefs about animism and vitalism. I do know that in reading this book, he is critiquing the mechanistic understanding of the physical as well as the metaphysical universe. And that model has been crumbling even amongst mainstream scientists for the past few decades, several decades perhaps. Anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. Anyway, I'm just explaining the backstory and some of the people that I've been reading for the last several years. Him being one of them, and Elena Freeland is definitely someone that needs to be checked out. These are advocates. They're helping us. Just as more recently, we're finding books by Robert Kennedy Jr., Robert F. Kennedy Jr. with the Children's Health Defense Fund, and incredible activists, medical doctors, scientists, lay people, you name it, a whole mixed bag. It's all an even playing field so far as coming out and getting the material out there. And if there's anything positive to be said about the past 2 years, it's that whoever's responsible, the small cabal that's responsible for the lockdown, they have awoken a sleeping giant, a whole population of not just one giant, a tribe, a nation, a borderless nation of giants. So that's the good part. And again, don't be deterred by the seemingly dark title of this particular talk, because as you know by now, after myself doing this for over a year now, I always see these attacks as opportunities, right? You know, the old saying about crisis meaning opportunity, you know, the Chinese character. I believe that, and it's true. It's absolutely true. These challenges present opportunities for us to exercise our creative ability, our rational ideas. This is a really good example of that maxim, right? Opportunity crisis. Firstenberg went into the whole history of electricity, right? Can you imagine that? How simple, but how brilliant. It's like saying, I'm going to do a natural history or a social history. Let's say there's a natural history, but there's a social history, there's a political history of electricity. But it's like saying, I'm going to do the social history of air. And the air that we're breathing in 2022 is different than it was pre-war, pre-World War I. It does have a whole, even our natural world has a social history because we live in a physical universe that's always been being acted upon by human beings and our institutions. And our institutions have, and ourselves, we have to take responsibility as well, have not been doing so well for the past 150 years or so. It goes that far back. In fact, it even goes, I'd say, well, this is Firstenberg. It goes back to the late 18th century, not long after the American Revolution, the French Revolution. Scientists, and this is really the origins of modern science, let's call it, with empirical method, right? The scientific method has become generalized. It's not all metaphysics anymore. It's empiricism. Thanks to the Scottish Enlightenment, people like David Hume and the great thinkers, the philosophers, and as well as scientists of the British Isles, many of them Scots, by the way. Incredible revolution. So I'm not criticizing that in the sense that we have to do away with it and go into some sort of paganistic world, a return to some sort of pre-modern world. It's not being necessary. It's not even feasible, right? It's not practical because there are neo-pagan elements out there that are arguing that we got to go deep ecology, right? Because human beings themselves, ourselves, are part of the problem. Maybe if we eliminate it, and you know where that takes us, right? The deep ecologists, the fact that human beings are viruses in ourselves who are destroying the earth, and therefore, if we call a significant portion of the human population, our problems will be reduced, if not solved. Well, I don't want to hint at that. I don't want to even give these people an opportunity to advance that argument. And by the way, that's not their argument. That's an argument that's subsidized and funded by eugenicists, right? The deep ecology movement is funded by the corporatists. You here in the live chat here know how subtle these people work. They control every single aspect of the argument, including the controlled opposition. Arthur Firstenberg is not part of the controlled opposition. One good hint is the fact that he's publishing with, it's called Chelsea Green Publishing. They're based in White River Junction, Vermont. I don't know where that is. It sounds beautiful, though. White River Junction? Wow. Sounds idyllic. But it's not one of the major locked up globalist corporatist publishers, and they're all owned by a hand. It's kind of like the record business, the music business, the film business. They're all held by just a few number of corporations. So there is still independent publishing going on, and they're under attack, I'm sure. And it's very well, the production values are great. It didn't fall apart. The paper is of good quality. The printing is excellent. The typography. I look at the reproductions of some of the photos in here are excellent. The charts, the graphs, the graphics, in other words, excellent. And I look at this as sort of an index to gauge the health of intellectual exchange through the books, through the music and whatnot, because this is what's going on here. So he's maintaining a high quality, and just opening the book, going into it, it makes me feel good and receptive to his argument, even more so, right? Yes, it's the little things that count, such as this. So, you know, most of myself, to a certain extent, I'll have to include most of the general public, even though we might be libertarian or conservative. I don't really consider myself a conservative. I'm pretty L with a small L or a capital L. I'm kind of liberal. I'm pretty open and tolerant to just a lot that goes on in the culture and society. No, I do not think grown men or teenage men should be going on these little trips, these little outings. That in California there was a minor scandal, or maybe it's a major scandal, that when it was revealed to the parents that they were having this sort of mixed type of sleeping arrangements. And I'm warning you again, whether you're a teenager or an adult, you're in college or whatever, be careful about these school outings that go off campus, or even the ones on campus, the ones without any supervision, because that's when they start putting their hooks into you. And I saw this at my own institution. There were always these retreats, they called them. They have these, and they're at these private grounds. So it's not like someone can come in there and get in to the gate or behind the barrier or whatever, or even police patrolling there. It's behind these fences, and I called them out on that, and they stopped doing this. Maybe they're back doing this, but the institution I was with, they stopped having this annual Asian, they called it Asian Pacific American retreat. It was an annual deal. It was a big, you had to apply, and you couldn't take your own car there. You couldn't carpool. You had to go in a bus. And once you're there, it's like for the whole weekend, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, you could not leave. And then students told me later about what was going on. I said, "Oh my gosh, this is an incredible grooming exercise," and that's how they find out who the future leaders are that are going to be advanced through Model United Nations, and if they're really good and sleazy, they'll be advanced over to the Soros recruiting area, and then before you know it, they might be the governor of a state or a congressman or the prime minister of Canada. That's how it works. It's usually done through the university, especially the elite universities, and it's a process, and it starts at a very young age. Anyway, I didn't mean to go into that, but I like to provide some practical warnings to give context to these announcements, because whenever it's trumpeted on InfoWars or something, they don't ever really give the backstory. Oh, isn't it crazy? Isn't it awful? Isn't it stupid? How can this go on? And then there comes a barrage of name calling. Oh, these libtards, but they don't really understand the system or the structure behind it, and that allows the system to persist, to grow. Right? You got Milo Yiannopoulos. He's got nothing to say. He's a name caller. He's a distraction. He's not really getting it into the root structure of the problem. Arthur Firstenberg gets into the root structure of a problem that's so pervasive, most of us don't understand it, recognize it, or even want to acknowledge it. That's where I was going with this caveat. Whether you're libertarian, conservative, liberal, leftist, Maoist, Marxist, whatever label you want to put on, you could be a Chi-Com. You're into electronics. You're wired into the electronic world. And I'm not, as I stated earlier, I alluded to this, I'm not going to present some sort of utopian pipe dream about how we're going to turn the clock back or eliminate most of humanity so that the earth will rewild itself. That's on the agenda for, I'm sure, people at the Klaus Schwab and above level. That's probably what they mean by the Great Reset. They're going to reset the world, but we're not going to be around to witness it, right? And let that be a warning to the people who think that they're they're part of the system. You're going to be the administrator, you're going to be one of the winners, and we're going to be no, you're going to be gone too. So, given that fact that we're loath to give up our electronics, and I'm a gearhead just like anybody else, maybe less so in certain areas, but more so in others. So I'm not calling anybody out on this. I'm saying that there's some solutions and workarounds that I'd gladly agree to. I'd go along with them. And I'll explain some solutions, and some of them are quite within our reach, and some of them are fun. They're whimsical, they're highly creative. Children and teenagers and adults who are young at heart will find them really engaging. Instead of speaking in the abstract, let me just show you a book that I came across that, as I was preparing for this talk, I said, well, gee, it's such a dismal critique I'm about to present my fellows here in the room here with the Firstenberg critique. Isn't there some sort of positive here, and I came across this book that I ordered, and I haven't really gone through it very closely, but it's by a Weimar intellectual. Weimar meaning the period in German history, modern German history, right before Hitler was put into place. Yes, he was put in place. Some people say by Britain. But his name is Paul Scherbart. It's a reader. This person, he's new to me. And he's coming up with all these whimsical solutions. And he says, oh, they're just for the sake of irony and fun and whimsy and absurdist and all that. But I'm looking at this and I said, my gosh, all these technologies, including these glass houses that are structured kind of like this is pre-Buckminster Fuller, it's like a geodesic dome glass house. I said, my gosh, this would be a great workaround against all these electromagnetic frequencies we're being bombarded with in 2022 that are killing the bees and the birds and the flocks and the plants and the trees, and of course, us as well. In addition to make us obese and inflamed and perhaps more susceptible, because right now the focus is on the viruses, the V word, right? But more significant, more pervasive than that is this whole electromagnetic bath that we're in 24 hours a day to varying degrees, depending on how well you're insulated or where you live on Earth. But there's nowhere on Earth where today, after 150, maybe 170 years worth of increasing electromagnetic energies being put out there, which are also going into the off planet, outside of planet Earth, right? Into the atmosphere, atmospheric electricity. There's nowhere that we're really safe from. And so this person here, just when electrification was really kicking in Weimar, Germany. By the way, that was one of the sites of Weimar, Germany, of modern electrification, and that's why and Firstenberg makes an incredible correlation here. I learned so much from him. He says it's no coincidence that Sigmund Freud, we've talked about him and his daughter Anna Freud more than once here in these channels where I keep getting chased around. So Firstenberg says there's no coincidence that Freud is trying to treat these maladies which have never existed before in the annals of all human civilization anywhere. Western Europe, Asia, the Sahara, you name it, Central. Why? Why then? Guess you know where it is. Electrification. I'll get to Freud in a moment and all the implications there, right? So you see how pervasive this problem is. But Scherbart has a potential solution, a hexagonal glass house, or maybe a house with a lot of silicon, a lot of crystals in it, right, to deflect. And when you think about it, you see these, you don't see them as much anymore because they're buried underground, which is even worse. But we used to see these power lines that had these glass insulators in the old days, as late as the 50s and 60s, you'd see them, and they gradually took them out. So glass is a really good insulator. So maybe Scherbart, because of his sage-like ability to peer into the future and to extrapolate where we need to go. See, we have to depend on artists. Again, always the sculptors, the intellectuals, the writers, the musicians, the painters, to find a way out. That's why I see this as an opportunity for all kinds of young people who are young at heart, to get us out of this predicament. We can do it. We are endlessly, boundlessly creative with a small c. There's only one major C creator there, and that creator said, okay, have at it, go to it. You're going to create your problem, but you're also going to, it's up to you to fix them. I'll just I might intervene if it gets really bad, but don't count on it. Pray a lot. Maybe I'll do something, but you got yourself into it, get yourself out of it. Like my dad once told me, he said, you made your bed. Now you got to sleep in it. Okay. So this is all well and good, all right. We have problems with dealing with our conveniences. You can deal with them one on one. I don't use the microwave oven. I unplugged it. I don't even have one. On and on. Smartphone's gone. I had to renew it recently in order to get a code in order that I can do this double verification for Google. But I'm going to let that expire. I had let my iPhone expire. I hadn't had it running for about a year. I needed it when I had to go overseas. As you know, you can't even travel anymore unless you have some sort of smartphone hookup. And fortunately, I'm still able to travel. That might become less and less possible, not just for me, but for other people. However, this could be a business. This is one of my solutions. Create opportunities for people to make tons of money to solve this problem of atmospheric electrification and create a travel industry catering to people who are electrosensitive or who do not want to submit to certain medical protocols. There's a good niche there, and I think that's just the type of niche that capitalists like. These people have money; they're going to pay for that. By the way, flying used to be only for rich people anyway. It only was fairly recent where schlubs like me were able to get on the plane and for $98 go to Las Vegas or something like that. Before then, we were pretty much stuck where we had to drive everywhere. And that might not be possible anymore. Maybe it's good that we're going post automobile. The electronic automobile is the hybrid. That's definitely not a solution. Maybe mass public transportation is the way to go. I've lived overseas, and even though the electrification of the Shinkansen or the bullet train in Japan and the rail system is contributing to the obesity problem in Japan and ill health and inflammation. It's better than having a lot of electric vehicles on the street, I think. Anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. So Firstenberg starts with pointing out something very obvious to us, especially now in 2022. This book came out in 2017. It was republished in 2020, so it's fairly recent. But he points to the fact of all these, this is a real attention grabber. He points to the fact of all these people in the prime of life, these elite athletes, people you would think don't have a single health problem imaginable, dying, just keeling over. And it's not just recently that's been going on, right? We're seeing a lot of news about these football players or let's soccer players, we call them, or whatever sport it might be, just keeling over. And they say it's because of the, you know what. But this has been going on for quite a while now. And Furstenberg saying it's because of electromagnetic energies. He writes about 1988, and I remember her. FloJo, remember she had those crazy fingernails, and she was really decked out on this track outfits. There was one leg. I mean, and she's got the braids, everything. She really brought a lot of glitz to female Olympic sports. That's FloJo. Her name was Florence Griffith Joyner. She comes from a whole family and married into Kersey Joyner, her brother-in-law, husbands. They were all Olympic level elite amateur athletes. She won the gold medal, but she died in 1998 at age 38. Imagine that. You and me, and I'm not gloating here, but you and me, everybody here in the chat room, we outlived FloJo. And she could, we could barely get out of blocks and she'd be crossing the finish line, right? So you get my point here. And then you have Dave Logan, who I didn't know who he was. He's a football player, apparently. He died at 42. This is in 1998. And the problem kept on multiplying to the point where in 2006, the Minneapolis Heart Institute Foundation started a registry, in America only, a national registry of sudden deaths of athletes only. And that's amateur and pro, I assume. I don't know how if it goes down to Little League and Pop Warner or it goes just to high school or in college. But you get the point. They're able to have a baseline measure on athletes, people in good health, in other words, who shouldn't be having health problems, who are dying, right? And Firstenberg, I won't go into the details of the study, but Firstenberg supplies study after study after. It seems like he's looked at every single one of them and he's documented them. About the last quarter of the book is full of endnotes, citations, references, heavily documented. And yes, thank goodness he has an index as well. I told you this book is incredibly well put together on a production level, and it's going to stay in my library. I'm not going to pack it away. It's going to be a standard reference, not a reference book, but a reference source for me from now into the foreseeable future. So then he goes into because this is more less sensational. You have to kind of slug through the history here, but he makes it really interesting. He talks about the electrification process, the electrification history of Western Europe and Northeastern America. It's an Anglo-American process initially, right? Because it's the Anglo-American world that kind of, in the modern age, spearheaded development, not just in the home countries, but around the world. And a lot of it was done through the electrification revolution and communication, transportation, transport, but it was all but held together by electrification. So he starts out here. The systematic electrification in Europe, we're talking about Western Europe now, because even today there are parts of Central Europe that are not as highly electrified as it in 2022 as the rest of Europe. Maybe parts of the Ukraine, like the Eastern, is probably maybe not. Maybe parts of Mongolia are not as electrified. Those might be the places to bug out to if you want to escape it, and if you want to, for health purposes, need to be away. But anyway, it started in around 1840, and it began with the telegraphy industry, the magnetic telegraph, the Great Western Railroad, because telegraphy and railways go hand in hand, right? And this is outside of London. This is when it first starts. And by the way, I just realized that my fascination with currently of literature of the British Isles and northeastern America happens to coincide with the electrification of this part of the world. And I'm reading, well, Conan Doyle was writing decades later, but he's writing about his hero, his figure, Sherlock Holmes, which everybody knows. And of course, Dr. Watson is the narrator of all these stories. I'm reading them just like I'm reading Fleming all over again. And he suffers from nervous disease, if you want to call it disease. I'm just using it in colloquial terms. I'm talking about Sherlock Holmes, and so does Dr. Watson to a certain degree. And it's so bad for Sherlock Holmes that he has become a cocaine addict and a morphine addict. And Dr. Watson helps him. He's a medical doctor, right? Helps him, even though he's trying to discourage Sherlock Holmes from taking his 3 times a day injections of cocaine rather. And he called it's the 7% solution of cocaine that he takes. And there was a movie, or maybe it was a novel as well, called The 7% Solution, about Sherlock Holmes. And only now do I realize that there was a reference to the fact that he was a junkie. So why were all these junkies being created? I think a lot of it, and this is not from Firstenberg, this is again inspired by Firstenberg. I'm able to understand the world of this of London, England, the electrified England, with all the telegraphy, the railways, the communication systems, and the early telephone system, all the copper wiring, a lot of it strung across homes and houses in the open. I'm able to tie it in now with some of these problems that are beginning to occur at this point in British and later Northeastern, just by a lag of about 10 years, and across all over the world, all these different ailments, maladies even criminality, certain types of behavior. And Firstenberg doesn't talk about pathologies, right? Behavioral pathology. He's talking mostly about physical problems created by the mass electrification of the world, starting in Western Europe and Northeastern America. By Northeastern, we're talking about New York, Boston, right? Maybe into New Jersey. The urbanized area, well, corporate America was headquartered in a lot of these these energy companies, telegraphy, telephone companies. That's where they were based, right? And the far west was still fairly much undeveloped, right? And that changed very, very quickly. A lot of family fortunes were made as a result of the electrification process, including the Guggenheim family. They got wealthy by the Anaconda copper mines because, where copper is used, right, for wiring, and down to Latin America. So the whole process also helped to exacerbate industrial problems, class conflict, colonialism, the theft of lands overseas. It's all very much goes hand in hand. So if you want to talk about capitalism, these Marxists, these Antifa people, the BLM people who want to destroy the system, right? Why don't you start with your cell phone? They would never give that up, man. Ilhan Omar, by the way, there's a former NBA player who's going to run against her, which is great. See, I'm telling you, all these problems create opportunities. This guy's going to be great. I want to interview him. I hope I can get to him, right? And AOC, could you imagine AOC without rocking her iPhone, right? So by 1850, the telegraph lines, they were under construction around the world, not just in London, not just in New York and Boston, but everywhere except for Antarctica. And that, again, made a bell go off. Where are the elite of the world, including people like John Kerry? Where are they really looking at? Like, they kind of disappear for a few days and they turn up and say, oh, yeah, I was just down in Antarctica, probably looking for bug out situations there. I think it's probably Antarctica is probably, I'm just guessing how, I wouldn't know. I think it's pristine. You're going to get some subterranean, very low frequency electronics coming through, right? But you're not going to get the ambient. You're not going to get the atmospheric there. So maybe the Germans at the end of the Reich or during the height of the Reich, maybe they had it correct. They said, we're going to call this Neue Schwabenland. Neue Schwaben, we're going to go to Antarctica. Doesn't matter if Germany gets destroyed and Austria and parts of the Soviet Union and France and millions of people are going to die, but we're going to rebuild our new civilization down in Antarctica. And it's going to be a low electronics civilization, I guarantee you. So, according to Firstenberg, 22,000 miles of wire, this copper wire, that energized the United States. 4,000 miles, this is by 1850, through India. Okay? And in China, it didn't start happening until 1920. And you can trace the different types of physical problems and maladies with the growing electrification through telegraphy and telephony, telephones, and radar later on. Right? World War II is a quantum move forward towards more and more electrification of our environment. And by 1875, you've got 30,000 miles of submarine cable that had demolished I'm reading from Firstenberg, demolished oceanic barriers to communication. So yeah, by the time the Titanic came around, my gosh, we had transatlantic communications going through, right? And these were mostly for the elite groups. And then later on, it became more of a commodity. And now every bozo has a cell phone and almost everybody has access to a telephone. Not saying that's bad. I mean, the telephone itself, the technology. I'm saying the arrays that the infrastructure supports it needs to be radically rethought and revisioned and re-engineered. And that's where the money is going to be made, by the way. I told you there's a solution, and the solution is not by moral suasion or by saying, oh, yeah, you shouldn't do this, right? Finger wagging. The solution is to provide material incentive for people to make tons of money to change the situation. What if we de-electrified the world? So all the same families that made tons of money selling all that copper wiring and doing all the engineering, if they reverse engineering, they're going to make tons of money again. And then at the same time, they'll be able to put in maybe silicon-based technologies that are going to take us out of this course of self-destruction, which they're part of, by the way. All right, just an idea, right? I'm sure some slick, inventive, creative capitalists will come up with a solution, and if enough people are on board, we can do it. But we got to do it soon, I would imagine. So, what happened? Again, I alluded to this at the beginning of the talk. There was this young Viennese, I guess he was still called an alien at the time, but later they called him psychiatrist, psychologist, and his name is Sigmund Freud. And he started identifying these problems, especially amongst women, called it hysteria, based on an earlier diagnosis that was centered upon the female reproductive organ, right? They called it hysteria, but he put it more generalized, and he located it in the mind instead of in the body. And because of Freud, according to Firstenberg, there's this whole general category called neurasthenia that was developed to explain away what he sees as the electrification of the world, right? And Freud, he says, and I have to take his word for it because I haven't seen the article. I'll have to check his references here, his citations. But he says, according to Freud himself, he at a certain point, he said it's not in the mind; it's coming from an environment, a physical source. He didn't know what it is because they hadn't done the studies. They were electrifying like mad, but the research had not been studied. It hadn't been around long enough for, in any case, to do a longitudinal study for what the short-term and the long-term effects of electrification might be. Although at a very early stage, you had people like even Benjamin Franklin who experimented with electricity, people like Guglielmo Marconi, I think even Tesla, they all had problems. We'd call them autoimmune problems, health problems. Marconi had 10 heart attacks. I think he died of a heart attack, right? He's the father of radio. He was dealing with radio waves. He was dealing with electrification. Edison, all these people, they all had problems with electricity because they were experimenting with it. So even before the time Freud came around, there was anecdotal as well as medical articles, medical journal articles talking about it. In fact, Firstenberg, he's very, very thorough, says that by the early 19th century, 10% of the medical journals in Britain, 10% of them had to do with problems related to electrification. Some of them were saying that's going to be a boon to all that ails humanity, but a lot of them were talking about some of the prospective current and future problems that were being created. And he talks about, and it's, I don't have time to go through some of the names here, but he goes through the histories of all these people. These are men and women of science who are not really, including, let me give you one example, Margaret Abigail Cleves. I didn't know about who she was. 1848 to 1917, medical doctor. Why don't they teach this in women's studies, academic feminism, right? She was one of the pioneers in talking about electrosensitivity, and she had a clinic, right? She formed an organization called the American Electrotherapeutic Association. She wrote a textbook called Light Energy. We need to revisit these thinkers. A lot of them are American. This is what needs to be taught in the science curriculum, right? To the kids who are now being told that, hey, you can't really survive unless you have an iPad, right? Everybody gets a laptop, according to Bill Gates, right? And, oh my gosh, you know what that was leading to. And here's something, again, you don't have to take this on faith. I'll have to look at some of the citations and do some some reading up on this myself, but I'll just put it out there. On page 80, he has a whole subsection talking about influenza. This is the title. It says influenza is an electrical disease. And I'm reading this chapter, and he's making a very, very good case. So anyway, I'll let you read the argument there. It's what he's saying, that influenza, there were cases of it earlier on, but the acceleration, the prevalence of it didn't really start happening until the rise of what he calls atmospheric electricity. Atmospheric electricity, that's the operative phrase there. And he goes back into the young athletes. 1980, heart attacks in young athletes were rare. Only 9 cases occurred in the United States. This is 1980. The number rose gradually but steadily, increasing to about 10% per year until 1996. That's incredible. That's a talk about pandemics. And in 1996, the number of cases of fatal cardiac arrest among athletes suddenly doubled. Hey, you know what happened around 1996? Yeah, the smartphone, the iPhone, the mass blanketing, right? And again, there's an activist component here. Firstenberg talks about 2002, an association of German medical doctors who were dealing with environmental medicine. They began circulating documents amongst themselves. They were trying to educate the public. They were going so far, this is 2002, calling for a moratorium on antennas and towers used for mobile phone communications, right? So this has been a movement that's been going on for quite a while. In fact, Firstenberg's first book was published in 1997. I can't remember what it's called, but he's drawing the analogy of a microwave, of how we as human beings are being microwaved as in a microwave oven. Not literally, but figuratively, well, maybe literally, right? And then, of course, he goes into the implications of these large rise in anxiety amongst the general population, no longer just upper middle class Viennese women that Freud was treating, right, and called them hysterics, even though he realized there was a material environmental reason for that eventually. No longer just restricted to this group of women here, because out of, Oedipus complex, Electra, whatever, this whole schema that he and his followers came up with, it was much simpler with it. Electrification. Now it's more generalized. You've got this anxiety neurosis that has hit everybody. And you have noticed this. I noticed it amongst young people because I've been teaching long enough before the age of cell phone and before all the different routers and all the towers were in every classroom. I used to see young people who were so healthy and vibrant and intelligent and articulate and happy and centered and focused and attentive, respectful, no behavior problems. Man, I'm trying to think back. Am I just imagining it? No, that's the way it was when I first started teaching. And then that's around the time, it's about 96, 97, especially by 2000. It had changed like almost 180. Everybody was sick. Everybody needed to have special accommodation. And I'm not making fun of them, okay? They needed special accommodations to take exams. They needed extra time. They needed a tutor. It just got worse. And now at the time, I attributed to the Prozac scare, right? And I realized now that I was only getting part of it right. It was not just because I was reading Tenpenny and Dr. Not Peter Duesberg, but the other people talking Prozac Nation, and that whole and most of them have been proven right. But I wasn't getting the total picture. A lot of it was coming from this atmospheric electrification going on. And once I started learning this, because I was still teaching at the time, I started lecturing about it. And because I'm saying this is what I'm here for. We're here to study social problems, social issues. We're here to study problems that have arisen in history, whether it's empire, colonization, racial discrimination, sexism. said, but we're in a probably a worse situation right now. The whole entire human race is being attacked by this regime that no one even really wants to confront, except for people like, of course, Alana Freeland and Arthur Firstenberg and Martin Paul, and there's a number of people who. So I started bringing this into the curriculum, and you can imagine how well that went amongst, because your average undergraduate by that time, they were wedded to their dumb phone, right? So yeah, it's a harsh lesson, and it could be unlearned. Can be unlearned. And I'll give you one example. Once the literature was out that smoking tobacco was bad, that a whole social cultural revolution took place, right? Once it was the Mothers Against Drunk Driving said, hey, drinking and driving is not acceptable. The rates began to go down. Asbestos, they found out, said, okay, we're going to take asbestos out of all the buildings. And the World Trade Centers, by the way, they were due for an asbestos removal. And some say that's one of the reasons why they came down. They can accomplish a number of agendas, including collecting insurance while having, dealing with the asbestos problem. So there are examples after examples after examples where we can turn this around. Nothing is irreversible. These are human problems, and with our human solutions involved. And I mentioned that, I know you know this, because that was the common example I would get from prematurely wise 19-year-olds. Oh, we can never turn back. Professor, you're just a boomer and you don't really understand. You're a technophobe because you're not used to it. Get with the times. Well, I'm saying that's really not about that. I am with the times. I'm reading the literature. I'm ahead of the curve. You need to catch up to me, not the other way around. But of course, they're watching television shows and movie shows that they're watching the Simpsons, that show anybody who has anything together, they're just a bunch of clowns, right? They're laughable. That's what the function of the Simpsons is. By the way, most of the Simpsons shows are written by a bunch of Harvard PhDs in mathematics. All right. And Bob Odenkirk, he has a PhD in, I think, history or something like that. And I'm not just saying that to talk about the high level of intellect, right? That's on display at the Simpsons. I'm just saying that the people who are doing the social engineering have put these people in position in order to make fun of people like myself, right? So that when the Simpson generation comes into the classroom, they can just laugh it off. I think it's a big joke. Well, the joke is on you. You are the clown, not me. You're the one being clowned. All right. I had a whole bunch of notes here. I'm running out of time here, so I want to kind of move to the end here. Because my gosh, there are so many illustrious names involved, and they're all at top-rated Research One institutions. Mandel Cohen. My gosh, this is back in World War II. Do you know Professor I think he was an MD, so Dr. Mandel Cohen. He was at Yale. He was at Yale University. Well, he was educated at Yale. He was a professor at Harvard Medical School, so I think he was an MD. And he was back in World War II. He was talking about soldiers, draftees, who were suffering from anxiety. And he says it was because of the electrification. People were saying, well, it's shell shock, it's stress, it's being away from home, and it's a segregation, you're whatever, dislocation. Yeah, that might have been part of it, but he was drawing these correlations back in the 1940s. This is Mandel Cohen. We don't know about him. I didn't know about Dr. Mandel Cohen. I didn't know about Dr. Alan H. Fry. He was a biologist who in the 1960s was studying the effects of microwaves at Cornell University. All right, this is not crackpot science. This is legitimate, as legitimate as you want to take it. So at a certain point where all of us are going to have to face the facts of life, right? Put on our big boy long pants and grow up and mature and stop being candy ass and say, we have a problem. And we, as sentient, creative, imaginative, thoroughly committed human beings, committed to life and beauty, we can turn it around. And we're going to help our bird friends, our bee friends, our dogs, our cats, the cattle, the fauna, the flowers, the trees. And by the way, Firstenberg spends 2 or 3 chapters about experiments that were conducted by all these illustrious men and women of science who did experiments longitudinal on plant life, shielding them this versus non-shielding, testing the circadian rhythms of mice, right, or other or animals, mammals that go into hibernation. They found that these laboratory experiments couldn't figure out why these animals that they were bringing in to test, study hibernation, why they wouldn't go into hibernation. And one of them said, "Hey, why don't we put them into a cage, right, where that shields out the electromagnetism?" And sure enough, they went into hibernation because it was the electromagnetic frequencies that were disrupting their natural hibernation cycles. And of course, this is, you can extrapolate. You can say this, and this is why you are having problems sleeping at night, because you have your cell phone there, your router is on, and you're wireless. I'm wired, y'all, here. Everything here is hardwired. And I'm not just saying that as a form of virtue signaling. I'm saying that even myself, even I can take steps to mitigate. And who knows, maybe I'll move into a cave in some isolated area, even though you can't really escape all, according to Firstenberg himself, who was electrosensitive, by the way. And I think he lives in the New Mexico area, where he's been able to, as an activist, been able to forestall any installation of 5G technologies in his area. It's all done locally in a local base here. And he himself, and one of the reasons why he's such a great researcher, great writer, is because he was in medical school when he had to quit because of electrosensitivity. And I think he was Cornell undergraduate. He's a brilliant young man, and he would have been an incredible medical doctor, either researcher, practitioner, I'm sure. But because of his sensitivity, because it varies amongst individuals, he was unable to finish medical school. But fortunately, his brain, his mind, his heart, his soul was still very much in the battle. So again, maybe if he wasn't electrosensitive, he would have become a generic medical doctor prescribing Prozac and Xanax to people who are electrosensitive. You see how that works? And he points this out himself. One of the reasons why we have this whole upsurge in SSRIs is to mitigate or try to disguise or mask problems that are environmental, specifically atmospheric electricity in nature. So why not cut out the source? By the way, it's because of you see the rise of electrification. You also see the rise of this empire, the empire of pain, the Sackler family. These are the people who dispense the opioids, numb us to our pains that are created from environmental electricity. It's the subtitle's A Secret History, and that the coin dropped after reading Firstenberg. I said, that's how the Sacklers got rich. They were providing the balm, BALM, the salve for people's real hurts caused by this electrification of our world. Okay. Now, there's one part of the world where the scientists took issue with the British and the American, the Anglo-American bloc of scientists, and they said, no, it's electricity that's the source of the problem. And coincidentally, we're at war with them right now. We're at war with them because the people, the scientists who were going their own way and tracing the connection to physical and psychological behavioral elements, degenerative disease, influenza, all of it, obesity, respiratory problems, heart attacks. The people who were making this connection were Soviet. science. Maybe that's why Biden wants to go in there, because they want to destroy that knowledge base there. And by the way, the Soviet, and I'm not trying to lionize them, because of that knowledge, they were able to refine and perfect weapons that would use directed energy against the enemies, right? At foreign embassies in Cuba or wherever. They were really good at electronic weapon, and they probably still are. Maybe that's why Putin feels so confident that he'll be able to fight off NATO and the Ukrainian Nazis who never really left after World War II. So the Soviet researchers, this is Firstenberg I'm going with. He's an incredible writer. Please get this book. Please read it, share it, talk about it amongst family and friends. Only $25. It's very well spent. But anyway, the Soviet researchers, according to Firstenberg, in the 50s, the 60s, and 70s, that far back here, and I'm reading this, they describe physical signs and symptoms and EKG changes caused by radio waves that were identical to those that White and others had first reported in the 30s and 40s. So there is a decades long history behind this. Now it's time, since the world is in uproar anyway, we're in a state of incredible change and transformation. This is our opportunity, our crisis opportunity, to rethink and to redo our entire system, and it's going to be done creatively. Here's a book that I came across. I'll try to review it later. It's called The God Helmet Experiments, talking about visionary experiments through all electronic. By the way, if you survive a death, a certain amount of electrical suffusion, let's say in your body, will prolong your life. You may be miserable and unhealthy, but you'll live longer, right? So there's kind of a strange conundrum there. And before I leave, I know I'm out of time and I got to get ready for John O'Loughlin's show in an hour. I just got this book. I'm very happy. Before I went on air today, I've been hoping for a book like this for a while, because I'm a V.C. Andrews freak. And it's a biography, The Woman Beyond the Attic by Andrew Niederman. I'd like to get him on as a guest. I think it'll happen fairly soon. And ask him some questions about how he became the writer. See, V.C. Andrews herself only wrote 7 or 8 books, right, of the Flowers in the Attic and Seeds in the Wind and all that, but only 6 or 7 of them. And then she died because she had problems. Maybe she was electrosensitive. I don't know, but she was pretty much invalid in her entire life, and she didn't have a long life. But he took over, and he's written something like 80 V.C. Andrews with her name on it books, and he's in a good position to do a biography. So that's in the future. I'm going to be reading this book over the weekend. It's not all going to be doom and gloom. We have to conduct our lives as though, and it's going to happen, as though we're going to be healthy, wealthy, and wise into the immediate as well as the near future. So don't get down. Don't get down. Not necessary. We're going to prevail. Arthur Firstenberg did an incredible amount of research over 2 decades, 3 decades, in order to bring us the good news that there's a solution at hand, and we're all going to be part of that. So thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I'll see you in an hour at my friend and colleague's show. John O'Loughlin, my gosh, we're going to really, really have an interesting conversation. Thank you again. We'll see you soon. Bye.